I'd like to introduce Catherine Hammack Avron, as I introduced earlier in the introduction. With due respect to Ellen, Catherine might be my favorite colleague at the Center for Biomedical Ethics and Society. We've shared a number of research projects together, and she has a magic touch and is an important contributor to the ethics scholarship in our institution by ensuring that we're doing the best possible research we can do. I will let Catherine introduce her panel. Thank you for addressing the professional group here, and it's an outstanding group.
It is an outstanding group. It is also quite a large group. And so I'm excited to introduce all of these panelists. I cannot do any of you justice in the amount of time that I have to do so. But so in alphabetical order, Dr. Argawala is an anesthesiologist and a chief medical officer at Mass Eye and Ear, and an assistant professor of anesthesia at Harvard Medical School. He leads the hospital's medical staff office, the Department of Quality, Safety, and Value, and leads patient experience efforts. And in addition to providing OR anesthesia, he leads the Anesthesia Quality Collaborative for Partners Healthcare and co-leads the Enhanced Recovery After Surgery Collaborative. And his research focuses on improving the perioperative quality and safety for patients. We also have Dr. Greenberg, who is the, as of this week or last week, I think, the new chair of the Department of Surgery at the Medical College of Georgia at Augusta University. And she's also the Moritz Mansberger Distinguished Chair in Surgery. Her career focus has been using research to improve the quality and the safety of surgical care. And specifically, she's been at the forefront of a push to move surgical investigation, including video capture and analysis, into operating rooms in order to study the way that care is delivered. Dr. Hashimoto is the Associate Director of Research at the Surgical Artificial Intelligence and Innovation Laboratory at Mass General Hospital. As a general surgery resident, he co-founded the Surgical Artificial Intelligence and Innovation Laboratory and is the co-founder and the former co-course director of the Harvard Surgical Program in Innovation. And he is one of the leading researchers on the use of AI for surgical video analysis. We also have Dr. Pugh, who is a professor of surgery and the director of the Technology-Enabled Clinical Improvement Center at Stanford. She actually holds 3 patents on the use of sensor and data acquisition technology, and over, if I'm remembering correctly, over 200 medical schools and nursing schools actually use one of her sensor-enabled training tools for their trainees. And we also have Dr. Scheijben, which so she directs the OR Black Box Europe. And is the Chief Medical Information Officer at the Ministry of Health, Welfare, and Sport in the Netherlands. So there she's a professor of surgery at the University of Amsterdam. She is a gastrointestinal surgeon and chair on simulation, serious gaming, and applied mobile healthcare. She is a leading researcher in the field of mHealth and was actually the first surgeon to live stream an abdominal operation to YouTube directly using Google Glass. And finally, we also have Ms. Swanfelt, who is an operating room nurse manager at UT Southwestern, where they have recently implemented the OR Black Box. And so we're excited to get that sort of on the ground from the trenches perspective. So I'm going to move y'all over here. So thank you again, all of you, for being here. I know several of you have actually had this sort of hands-on sort of experience using things like OR Black Box. I'm wondering if you can sort of talk about and describe that process, what it looked like, and how it went for you. And if it's okay with you, Dr. Arguella, could you describe your experience with this?
Sure. Although, let me start by saying, so first, thank you to Alex for inviting me to be a part of the panel. He, in his kickoff this morning, there are folks that have been successful and those that have not been successful. And so I fall into that latter category. I tried for 2.5 years actually to get this up and going at Mass General Hospital after being introduced to the technology right at the beginning when Theodore and his team were getting it off the ground. But at that time, there weren't any US sites yet that were up and running. And we sort of fought these battles with the various powers that be in privacy and compliance and information technology to try to get it up and going. And then we started to fight the battles with the sort of social acceptance amongst anesthesia and nursing providers as well. So I can't really speak to how it is once it gets up and running, but I can speak a lot more to the barriers that we faced along the way there.
Yeah, let's start there. So we've heard a lot about sort of risks and benefits of video recording, and so what were those sort of the key barriers that you faced?
So I think that for us, the key barriers really were around privacy. And we approached this, there have been conversations earlier, throughout the day today about research versus quality improvement and how you position this in the institution for patients. And we tried all of the things, right? So we wanted to try to go down the quality improvement path and say that we were going to do this for all of our patients and sort of treat consent as an opt-out rather than opt-in, but just to let people know and include it in our general consent. But our privacy and compliance officers were not accepting of that from the patient perspective, right? So it's just, that's speaking from the patient side. Because of the capture of video and because the video capture was then going to leave the walls of our institution to be analyzed in another institution, actually in another country, there was strong feeling that the fact that the data was leaving our four walls was critical to their decision that we had to get consent from patients. Beyond that, there was a issue of consent from our providers, right? So this idea that we were going to be video recording nursing, anesthesia, surgical staff in every case, and whether or not we needed individual consent from each clinician that was going to be recorded. Ultimately, what we ended up with was we were able to get to opt-out consent for our providers in dealing with privacy and compliance within our institution, but still required to go opt-in consent for our patients, which required us to go through IRB and sort of create it as a research project, which we were able to do with quite a lot of back and forth, but that's as far as we got.
That is very helpful. And I believe, Jocelyn, is it correct to say that y'all are currently working with this type of technology at your institution?
Yes. Last August, we went live with, currently I have 44 operating rooms, and in 5 of them, I have black box. So at our institution, we chose to start with a smaller subset of service lines. So we started with the robotic service line. So I have the intuitive robot in 5 of my ORs. And so those are the ORs that we chose to implement the black box in.
So can you, so I've heard throughout this panel and also through previous ones, this idea of, there's multiple different stakeholders who have, varying concerns of different types and of different degrees. Can you describe what that looks like in your operating room?
So we had a lot of task force when it came to starting this up. We had, of course, the executive committee, and then we did we call the Black Box Socialization Committee, which involved a lot of different disciplines from nursing, anesthesia, surgeons, And then of course, more of the marketing advertising piece, because we speaking to the whole patient aspect of that. What does that look like? And so we started really early before we actually did the go live date to talk about how it's not, use the term big brother, which is a lot of things I had to do with the nursing staff, is I'm not spying on you. It is not a matter of I can see the feed. It's not a matter of any of that sense of a he said, she said. It's a matter of a quality improvement for our patients. So we started really early with the culture change of it before we actually turned it on. I think that's a big thing. If you're going to do something of that nature, you have to start early to encourage it. We had videoing images sorts type system where you could always see in our ORs from our front desk, but this is a little bit different when in that sense of that. So we just try to make it a big culture change so it wouldn't be so scary.
Fascinating. Thank you. What I've been hearing, and I think what I just heard was there is this element of trust between, of course, patients and the medical institution, the medical team, but there's also this element of trust sort of between healthcare providers and the institution. How, and this is a question for the group, how do we not just gain trust, but how do we earn that trust? So I'm hearing this this culture change and involving people in the conversation. How else can we sort of not just achieve that buy-in, but actually sort of earn it?
So I'm attempting to do this at my third institution. And I will say that what I've learned is that I think there's two pieces to it. I think it's culture, but then I also think that it's the level of risk aversion that a given institution has and how willing people are to take on risk and how they conceptualize that risk. In my mind, the way that you go about sort of gaining that trust, quite honestly, is through early projects with early wins that demonstrate how this project is going to be beneficial to each of your different stakeholder groups. And showing them that it's not being used in a punitive way. Again, just like any other technology, you're going to have early adopters. You're going to have people who want to opt out. In my experience, it's actually not that many providers that want to opt out. But you sort of, I think, have to give that option. Again, at all three of the institutions, we definitely have had lots of conversations about this issue around it being a condition of employment. What does that mean? And how does that fit with the different values that we have as an organization? And so, I think there are lots of moving pieces to this, but I think we all believe wholeheartedly that the advantages to all of the different stakeholders far outweigh the risks. And so the question really is, how do you get that vision across to all the different people that this impacts?
I think for us, we've been taking it sort of as a stepwise approach. I'm at MGH. I remember the black box process a lot when you're trying to get it through and working on that IRB with Maureen and you. And in our lab, what we've done is, we have offered our lab services to the residents and to the faculty that if they record a case, while we do have some ORs that have a centralized system that you can easily download the cases that you record, others are the old school, plug in a USB and download the case off. And so our fellows are more than happy to retrieve that data for the surgeons when they want to review their own cases, or if they want to show off the cases at our teaching conferences or at M&M. And so it initially started out within the department of, oh, we're happy to download pictures for you and give them to you so you can use them in your op notes, you can show your patients. And then it slowly turned into, hey, do you mind if we have this algorithm that we trained on other data, do you mind if we try it on your data? And we have slowly built up that capacity to where for M&Ms and teaching conferences, we can do the overlay from our algorithms, particularly one that we call Go No Go Net, which shows some of the safe areas of dissection and dangerous areas of dissection, and where does the machine predict those are. And we get to show that to the residents in their teaching conference and say, hey, look, here's where the difference was. And what do you think about that? And the faculty are all there and they engage in a conversation on that. And so we really tried to build up the educational value of the video for everybody. And that's one of the ways that we've tried to slowly get buy-in from the residents and the faculty. And then the patients, they're actually quite happy to hear that their surgery is being used to sort of train the next generation. And for the most part, almost everybody's been okay with it. And the ones that don't want us to record them, then we just don't.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I'll just say that I was successful taking the same approach with nursing as well.
Yeah, and I was just going to chime in. I mean, this question reminds me of the collaboration Dr. Greenberg and I had when we banded together to educate all of the stakeholders what we really wanted to do. Interestingly enough, there were already cameras in the operating room, and the culture change in the OR had happened well before she and I arrived in Wisconsin. But we also wanted to have them in the trauma bay in the emergency room for a specific project. And it was very interesting. We met with compliance officers, legal groups, nursing groups. And at some point in that relationship, we shared articles with them. The Kaiser system has a number of articles relating to their reviews of their actuary data and litigation history, showing that I believe it was over 80 to 90% of the time, when video was discoverable in a legal case, it actually helped the physicians. And most of the people who were saying, no way, we're not going to do this, they were unaware of that history. And so we shared articles. Then we actually shared a picture of the video view of the team with a patient in the emergency room, and they were shocked. You could hardly see any of the practitioners' faces, and you couldn't see the patient at all. I mean, and they just had this fear. I think in their mind, if you're sitting in a room and you're talking about it, and they're just like drawing a line in the sand, they're coming from a point of a vision that they have in their head. When you show them pictures, when you show them articles, and you show sort of this world that's outside of the place that you live in right now, it really helps to bring everyone to the table, that then you can have a discussion from the same point of departure.
That is so fascinating to me, and I wouldn't have thought of that, but that rings perfectly true, that that what types of information an observer might be able to get from like a black box or a video of an actual surgery. I have no idea what that looks like. But I'm wondering, Dr. Pugh, could you talk more about, so we've been talking about the OR black box, we've been talking about video, these other types of sort of sensory-based sort of measurements. Can you talk more about sort of the way that you think about it, of course, but then the way that surgical teams might react to that?
Sure. No, we've had a lot of fun exploring a variety of wearable technologies that would complement what you're capturing with video data. And we synchronize all of our data streams, wearable data streams, with video data. And I think it just is additive. We've used EEG sensors, motion tracking sensors on the hand. We've explored eye tracking sensors. A lot of folks we've explored as well, some of the biologics, heart rate, and those type of sensors. And again, always synchronizing it with video. When I first started wearing some of the wearables in the OR, I was actually pleasantly surprised. I think, ironically, there is a curiosity in the wearables that may allow, this to sort of data capture concept to move forward in a different way. And I think it's because people are already using wearables broadly. Your Apple Watch, your any type of sleep tracker and things like that. And so the nurses wanted a sensor. They wanted to wear it. The anesthesiologists wanted sensors. And I think that if you say we're using the sensors and we are synchronizing it with video, but our goal is to actually use the sensor to tell us what parts of the video to look at, they then have this perception that I was really surprised by. They just have a perception that you're now, instead of using the video just broadly to capture everything and potentially it could be used as a document or a record of care. We're actually using the video to tell us about ourselves, and there's maybe a better chance that it may be used for us to share information amongst ourselves as practitioners. So we were pleasantly surprised by that feedback. And so it's an inspiration that there is an opportunity there to really sort of twist the perception into what we really want in the first place. We are really wanting this data to improve the quality of what we do, but we're doing this on a platform within an industry that has a specific measurement culture that, to be quite frank, has not been used to benefit practitioners. It's been used to impose sanctions and to monitor us externally. You know, we wanted to know whether, you know, you're good enough to be credentialed, whether, you know, you made a mistake. But no one's thinking about how this, or at least, and I say no one, I'm being dramatic. I mean, the broader group, when you talk about it, they don't think that we really want this data to improve what we do. And how do you partner with us to protect it so that we can provide the best care for our patients? So the fact that the patients would want it for litigation purposes almost defeats the whole thing. You're burning a candle at both ends. And how can you want to take the very data that could help us improve quality so that we can do better operations for you, but you want to take it and use it against us? There's some serious issues there that we need to overcome.
I want to just touch on one point. I think Dr. P, you started to mention this, and a distinction between what Dr. Hashimoto and the way that the data is being used, the way the video is being used in a setting to try to improve the technological aspects of doing surgery, right, is different than utilizing OR room video to try to improve team performance. And how they're both, you know, we're talking about surgical recording sort of generally throughout this conference, but that the implications of those two specific use cases are actually quite different. So if looking at laparoscopic video to try to improve how a resident, you know, moves their hands during an operation is a very specific kind of educational purposed use of the technology. As compared to, say, looking at everyone in the OR and how handoffs are conducted when a surgical tech comes in and out during a lunch break, when the anesthesia team hands off at the end of a shift, at the communication patterns around a critical event, right? So what happens before, during, and after a moment that there is a hemorrhage, as an example, right? Or cardiac arrest, and whether, you know, whether the arrhythmia comes before the cardiac arrest or the arrhythmia comes after. There's these issues that come up when you go back and try to analyze cases, trying to understand what happened first, what happened second, that the video can provide much, much more depth and detail than we have in our existing pathways. But I bring it up because it gets really complicated, right? Who are the stakeholders, and who cares, and how do you socialize this when you're trying to implement this? Depends on what your use case is and what you're trying to get after. And so I think it's a critically important piece of how we think about the social and professional acceptance of video in the OR as you try to push it through.
No, I appreciate that, and I never meant to. I 100% agree with you. There's a difference in the people who are necessarily at the table to a certain extent, in terms of how do we all work with this together, because there is a silo between anesthesia and surgery. We have done better in the past 5 to 10 years in terms of having joint conferences and coming together and doing, you know, joint simulations and team training. But I still believe that at the higher level, this all relates to education. And the real issue that I see at a high level when you look at healthcare as a whole, there is a divide between the external groups looking at a system saying, great, you have all these people who've already been trained, put them in, this space, and they should work together well. And if you don't do well, you're going to be sanctioned and your hospital is going to be raided and the whole 9 yards. And that framework still exists, whether we're talking about moment-to-moment decisions of an individual surgeon versus a whole OR team. That external culture of sanction of healthcare professionals prevents us from coming together to use this type of data for our learning before you impose sanctions. And I'll let Caprice, I can see
Yeah, so I guess I have to say, I actually totally disagree with the basis of what you just said, Alok. I mean, in my mind, these are all totally integrated into how we perform in the OR. And so, I have a little bit of a different perspective because I come at it from coaching for performance improvement. But the thing that we see is even when it's just the surgeon sitting down and talking about a case or trying to talk about how they're performing, say the technical aspects of the case, they can't really talk about that without talking about the teamwork component, without talking about who's in the room, without talking about when handoffs take place, without talking about sort of all of those other things that you talked about. And so I actually think that we would be doing ourselves a very big disservice to try to silo this into sort of the technical component of what happens at the operating room table from the social components of what happens in the OR, because I think you need both, and you need them both integrated and synchronized in order to really have a full perspective of what happened. I do agree with Carla about the importance of where this is coming from and who it's driven by. And one of the reasons that I'm trying to create a sense of urgency within surgery and anesthesia and nursing is because I think we as the frontline providers need to be driving how this is used, so it's used in a constructive way. Because as soon as we have a Department of Public Health, or we have, a malpractice insurer, or we have some regulatory body telling us we have to do this, it automatically is going to become punitive, and we're going to miss sort of this critical window of opportunity to introduce this in a really constructive, positive way.
No, Caprice, thanks for that. The interesting thing when you look at a healthcare system as a whole, if only the surgeons go and are pushing for video and broadly, because we do want the moment-to-moment technical, we want the cognitive, and we want the team, the handoff. That's leadership, that's team behavior. But if we're the only ones going to argue to a healthcare system without nursing and without anesthesia, they're going to see it as a surgeon issue, and then they will layer it on, with their perceptions of the surgical, style of doing things and other demands that we have. If it's more global, and we have to join hands and enforce this in terms of presenting an argument. So I think, there's multiple prongs
here. So let me try to clarify my comment, because I think it may be misconstrued. I think that that this technology is probably one of the best ways to bring the whole perioperative team together, right? The idea that you can that this should be a multidisciplinary, the full perioperative team with surgery, nursing, and anesthesia coming together to decide how to use the technology and create mechanisms around the technology to create learning and educational opportunities for everyone, right? To me, the gold standard would be, you do these cases and you do the debrief after with the whole team, which I think if Marlies, I know Dr. Scheiben was supposed to be a part of this, and that's the model that they've created in Amsterdam, for example, is that they routinely, on a regular basis with good cases and bad, I think go through and do a debrief the following week after a case has been recorded with all the members of the team, which is a fantastic way to improve team dynamics, right? And not at all about being siloed. I think my point with my previous point was that I think each place that implements something related to surgical recording, it just depends on how you're implementing it, right? Whether it's a full OR black box kind of thing, the way that the group out of Toronto is doing, but there are other platforms as well that are more limited in the scope of what's being recorded. And if you're just if you're talking about recording surgical video and using it for educational purposes, that's different than recording the whole OR and audio and the sensors from multiple people in the OR. It's just a different approach, and I think that comes into play when figuring out how to socialize it.
Sure.
So I think one of the things that we've learned at my institution is we do that same thing. We do the debrief. So we have taken quite a few deliverables back to us where everything's turned the way it's supposed to be. And we all watch it as a multidisciplinary team and go through stuff. And there's been some really big changes with us that have really helped. Like, we've just implemented a counting pause, which across many ORs that, as you know, counting can be a huge thing, but to ask the entire surgical team to pause while my nursing staff counts is a huge deal. And we got that out of the videos that we obtained, that it became an issue and that we needed to institute something to help the patient. So that was one of the big things that we did, and we watch all of it together. And I think it's a really good multidisciplinary thing.
Dr. Hashimoto, I'm wondering if you...
Well, so actually, the one thing I've been turning over in my head, I've been a little quiet because I'm actually going back to thinking about something Dr. Pugh said that I actually hadn't thought about, which is this idea that I think as we've seen throughout the morning, everybody is very interested in using this type of data to improve, and why wouldn't we be? I think we all got into this field to help patients and to be the best version of ourselves that we can do that. And I'd actually never thought about it from the perspective that Dr. Pugh pointed out, which is you have this group of individuals who is so motivated to better themselves in the interest of the patients for whom we care, and yet there's this standoffishness because of this looming threat of punishment coming from outside organizations, and I'm actually a little curious. I missed a little bit of the prior session right before this, seeing a couple of patients, but I'm a little bit curious as to everybody's thoughts here about where's the puck going in this situation? Do we see interest from malpractice insurers, regulatory bodies in bringing this in a potentially punitive way? I mean, obviously we have some interest from the American Board of Surgery, who's now soliciting videos to try to do some formative feedback through videos. SAGES is looking at that, at least from a minimally invasive perspective. I'm just sort of curious about where is it all going to come to a head, and what are people's thoughts on that or experiences at your relative institutions?
So I found the legal session really interesting because there were some different perspectives there than what I've heard. Again, as I mentioned, I've done this at 3 institutions, 3 different states over 20 years, and have talked to a lot of different lawyers and a lot of people who provide malpractice insurance. And the perspective that I had almost consistently heard until this morning was it's more likely to show that you provided standard of care. If you didn't provide standard of care, we want to know about it so we can settle and we cannot go to court and drag it out. And the benefits to the patients far outweigh the risk. And then the other piece around the retention policy, I had been interested in what the lawyers' thoughts were on this because, I had been told as long as it's a consistent retention policy and you destroy it within 30 days and everything is destroyed and that's your policy, it's not considered destruction of evidence, even if there is a negative impact. And so in my mind, sort of being very conservative as we roll it out in terms of our retention policy, which is those of us who have used video know is heartbreaking because this is so hard to collect that then if you're going to destroy it in 30 days, that's not where we ultimately want to be, but is one way to sort of offer what I thought was a layer of protection. And then also, I think some of the de-identification that places like Black Box are doing, I think are really exciting in terms of, again, taking it out of that individual patient and putting it into sort of these bigger buckets that allow us to look for patterns, that allow us to do the improvement, but maybe divorce it from the individual patient while we work out more around litigation. So I'll say that the legal session this morning certainly gave me pause and is going to have me have many more conversations about sort of the discoverability and the retention piece and some of these other issues. But again, I think we need to manage it and drive it.
Yeah, I think another thing to underscore, there are federal laws that have been enacted with the AHRQ and other constituents that protect some of this data. But then the state laws are a little different, and because they're not exactly the same, they can be pit against each other. So it's still not perfect, and there's still a lot of work to do on the legal side of things. So physicians don't feel fully protected to just line up and allow people to collect the data. And I think, we've spoken with the board. I think if you out the gate, start talking about credentialing before we even understand how to use this for improvement, I think that's just, it stops it dead in the water in terms of people feeling safe that you're going to do the right thing. So I think there's huge barriers that we have not overcome in our branding of this process. Interestingly enough, payers are interested, and insurance groups, they're expressing more interest because from a business perspective, if we all have great outcomes, it saves money for them. And that sounds great. And there are many groups who have funding, many surgical video groups that have funding from payers. The flip side of that hasn't been fully worked out. There's still a risk for the payers to then start cherry picking and stacking the deck. And that's going to be a problem for us because they still don't understand. Everybody feels that when a case doesn't go well, it's the surgeon's fault. They never look at patient anatomy, team factors, other things. And so that's going to be the balance for the payers from a business perspective. And still it's going to come back to us to partner with various organizations, the American College of Surgeons, other groups, to come up with a way that makes sense.
I wonder if rather, it's interesting to me that the payers would be interested in trying to support this. I think that's, you point out, it may have pros and cons that come along with the payers being the driving force behind it. I wonder what others think about trying to partner or trying to get the malpractice insurers actually to be the ones to push for this, right? That's in Canada, that's been, the CMPA has been one of, the primary partners for Black Box in getting that up and going. And I wonder if that's a mechanism, right? Because it gets to the heart of what we're worried about is that this is going to be used against us somehow. And if the malpractice insurers are actually behind it and trying to help drive this, that may help allay some of those fears.
And I will say that some of the most productive and forward-thinking conversations I've had on this issue were with CRICO RMF when I was in Boston. I think you guys are really fortunate to have them as your malpractice insurers because they really are dedicated to this stuff and can see where this is going.
I have a few more questions. So I'm seeing activity in the chat, particularly around, so one of my questions was going to be sort of heard a lot about de-identification, re-identifiability, these sort of privacy concerns. And I'm wondering, so Dr. Clayton said de-identification is probably harder than you think. One of my questions to the group was how the recordings are de-identified and sort of the risks of de-identification and how that might actually potentially affect the actions in the OR, if that makes sense. In other words, how de-identified am I, and does that sort of affect the way that I might behave in the OR?
So I can only speak on the sense of my area, but we were very transparent when it came to how we would de-identify everybody, where their faces would be blurred and their voices would end up sounding like Mickey Mouse. I think it's a matter of when we actually saw the video, once we got it, in the sense of what it looked like. I think a lot more people were confident in the fact that they weren't worried about, it's not a matter of, the punishment thing. It's not, nobody's going to be punished for what happens. It's a matter of what we can do to improve our process. So it really hasn't been an issue among the culture and the socialization of it, for sure.
one of the things that, so I am not a surgeon, I've heard a lot of this talk about sort of punishment and sanctions and liability and all of these things, but I'm also wondering the extent to which there's this sort of intangible, or maybe it is tangible, sort of like reputational risk, or sort of even just a hesitancy to sort of see one's own either mistakes or errors or just actions, right? Like just to watch myself on video might just be painful. Is there any sort of beyond the actual punishment, sanction, liability, is there that sort of social pressure, I guess?
I'm not sure. Wow. So surgeons are a self-selected cohort, right? I mean, we share videos amongst ourselves all the time. I mean, there's a Facebook, the International Hernia Society. I mean, we share videos. People post their videos on YouTube all the time with classical music playing to it. I think I think that there is a comfort in doing it amongst ourselves, and I think that we do share a lot more than people would realize. I think other industries that are super team oriented and technical, we all talk amongst ourselves, and we all have that. There's sort of a personal spirit of belonging that we all in this together, and it's therapeutic to talk amongst one another. Even with our anesthesia colleagues, I mean, we all see what's happening in the operating room, and I think there's a whole lot of danger in this notion, that surgeons aren't human, or physicians aren't human in high stress environments. I mean, if we had the video recording of air fighter pilots and the things that they said, in the midst of working together as a team, they're not robots. There are 4-letter words that just happen because that's what represents the moment in that time. I think those are privileged team experiences, and we respect it. But I think that none of that is purely public, except for in the movies. The movie portrayal of this is my team of folks in the bunker. I mean, I would do anything for this guy, and we'll die together. And they need to know how I feel in this moment, and how I feel is not how Snoopy talks about it. Sorry, it is. So there's torrential bleeding. I'm talking to my anesthesia colleagues, and we're like, holy something. And yes, then I'm not one who uses that word regularly, but when I do, they take it serious, and then they're like, okay, what do we need to do? That's the initiation of team conversation, and we will be the A team because we know each other's triggers and the language we use. That's not public. Anyway.
Go ahead. No, sorry, I thought you were done.
We don't worry about sharing that amongst ourselves. It's like you're in this personal club to watch a movie amongst ourselves, and we understand we are human. We know it amongst ourselves.
So I guess I have a slightly different perspective. Sorry, do you want to go ahead, Alok?
No, it's okay. I'll wait. Go ahead.
So I was just going to say, I mean, I have a slightly different perspective. I actually think this is a huge culture change for us in surgery. I think that we don't have transparency right now. I think that we are not used to putting ourselves in a vulnerable position, which it requires to look at your own operation and to share it with others. And so my take on this is that people are slowly getting more comfortable with it. I think it's really scary in the abstract. And once you do it, it becomes much less scary. I think the stuff that Carla's talking about, she's spot on. We definitely do, but those are self-selected cases and self-selected situations where you know who's going to be seeing it. And we're talking about a whole different scale here. And so, I think part of the piece of this that we really have to focus on is, number one, that it's voluntary, and number two, that it's being used constructively. And if we don't focus on those two things starting out, we're going to lose. And so I think people are open to it. I think that people see as soon as they're exposed to it, they see how much the advantages outweigh how scary it is. But I personally think it's a big, big culture change.
Caprice, no, I love your perspective from that. I think the fear is that how do we do this if it does become mandated? I mean, how do you think about it from that perspective? And I think that is where the hesitancy, there's early adopters. We're out there, we're sharing, we're doing this. And there's some hesitancy in the beginning, and then you see it and then you get going. Those are still the early adopters, and we are still in this safe space where it is voluntary. But I think that the bigger conversation and the fear is how are we going to function when it's not voluntary, and also that we're mandated to share the video with patients.
In my mind,
there's multiple. There's multiple aspects to this, right? So to the points that have been made, the sharing of videos when you put them on YouTube and you share them in a conference, it's the Facebook life, right? It's the best of. It's you selected the best moments in your surgical, whatever it is that you're sharing, the best version of it. And this is opening the door to your living room every day when you're in the middle of your normal regular life. And I think that's a very different way of sharing information. And then the other part is that, as we've pointed out, right, this is potentially with the whole team, and not everyone is comfortable sharing every bit of that. And there is this Big Brother thing that we have to deal with, and how many places is Big Brother watching us? Now, in some ways, that's getting easier because there are cameras in more and more places. And in the previous panel, there was a conversation about, can you make it a condition of employment? Well, I have 3 small children, and we have a nanny, and we have nanny cams in our house, and it's a condition of employment, right? So anyone that we have that's going to come and provide childcare knows that we have cameras in our house. So as we move as a society in that direction where there are cameras everywhere and video everywhere, I think some of the fear will dissipate because it's just part of how we live our life.
And I think the other piece of that, I really like that perspective. And I think the just to add on that, I think the other piece of it again is doing it in a constructive way, rolling it out and saying, look, if we have, let's say the mandatory piece becomes that you must participate in a program like this, you must review your video, you must know where you are, and you must be working to improve. And maybe we have some kind of floor, but it's not something that's going to be, you have to reach certain levels, and there's going to be these sort of, summative evaluations of what you do. And we really try to have this stay in the formative evaluations. This is about improvement. Your participation is mandatory, but it's not about assessment. You have to reach some certain level in order to, stay credentialed or something like that. And maybe I'm just being an optimist that we'll be able to keep it in that really positive way. I am
so excited that you, Dr. Greenberg, and Dr. Agarwal are optimists. I live in the remembrance of when the cardiologists band together and took down the American Board of Internal Medicine because they did not agree that their assessments applied to them, and a boatload of other things. And literally, we are now living in a time and place where I believe they're almost up to 50%, and 50% of our states, it is illegal to require board certification for a job. Let me be clear. We're a self-selected group. We have not made the House of Surgery and Anesthesia and our teams feel safe that this is going to be a condition of employment. There will be civil unrest at a huge magnitude against the Institute of Medicine and Surgery if we have not done right by making everyone feel that they're safe in terms of going to this. People will protest, and they will enact they will go for policies to bring it down before we get to that point. This was covered by the New York Times, Newsweek, the cover of Newsweek at that time. I believe it was maybe 2013. And the board and the American Board of Medical Specialties have never lived it down. I mean, it was a huge deal when the physicians went against the organization, and then they took it to the state and the legal level, and now are going state by state to make it completely illegal. Just in that thing, in terms of requiring board certification for employment, we have a long ways to go.
I think that the way forward is to focus this on where we started, which is that this is about improvement of our teams and improving care for our patients and identifying opportunities where we can do better. And that, to me, is why we're all here doing this, right? It's why some of you have devoted literally decades at this point trying to make this happen, because we believe there's potential for improvement, and that ultimately is what we're all in it for. And what all of us as physicians and nurses and anesthesiologists are, all of our colleagues are there to try to provide high quality patient care. And I think that's the argument that we got to use to convince our colleagues, right? Is that there's value in it, and getting people to at least let it start, and then showing them the value that comes from being able to do it. But it does require more than just the technology. As so many have said, it requires a comprehensive process around debriefing and learning from and using this data in a way that's going to actually improve care. It's not just about doing the recordings and letting, whether it's AI or a human that's looking at it, do an analysis and let that be in isolation.
So this has been fantastic, though I see Dr. Langerman has appeared. So that is my cue that it looks like we are running out of time. Is that correct?
I mean, if there's any last minute burning questions, it's not like the machine shuts off, or thoughts, if anyone had a last comment.
I actually wanted to ask Dr. Hashimoto. He and I have been chatting on the side of, and also Ms. Runfeld, if you have any thoughts on this. Are there any sort of things that you were sort of surprised haven't come up? So this was spurred by Dr. Pugh. I did not know that about board certification. So there are sort of huge issues that we may not have covered. I'm wondering if you have sort of thoughts on. I'm surprised that this hasn't come up yet.
Well, the one thing I was thinking of, that it's not so much that I was surprised that didn't come up, but I'm surprised we didn't talk about it a little bit more, is actually something that Ms. Swanfeld brought up, the socialization committee and advertising. I'd never thought, and maybe I misinterpreted or misheard, that you'd advertise to patients that you now have the black box. Is that correct? So that's one thing that sort of is like sort of blowing my mind a little bit. I think about sort of how robotic surgery has taken over, and a lot of that has been patient driven. We all know the data. There's very mixed data about the benefits of using the robot, and yet patients want it. And so hospital systems keep buying them. And I'd never thought about advertising to patients that your operating room has the capability to record video and that they would start demanding it. And is that something that's going to drive adoption and change culture?
I can't speak to every part of it. I just, because, at my facility, everything is very segregated as far as who does what. But yeah, so during the actual implementation, we developed a whole one-page thing for patients for them to better understand when our residents go and talk to the patient about it, when they consent them, what exactly is it, kind of an overall brief overview of what it looks like and what it consists of. So yeah, we have different things that we use to talk to, including staff. So there was one for the patients. There was one for all of my staff, including nursing and physicians, in which it kind of was just a one-page thing that they could even use a QR code, and it would populate on your phone to talk about what it looks like, kind of just some high-level overview of what it was. So it kind of helped with the whole socialization, so it wasn't so scary. Yes, we did do that.
I'll look for the billboards on 95 coming up soon. We have Black Box, smart insights for your smart surgery.
And the halo effect. Yeah, I love it. Well, what a great ending, and thank you all for this panel. This was good. There was some controversy. It seemed like the time flew. This was the longest panel and it went quick. So, Catherine, thank you. And to all the panelists, thank you for your time, commitment to this. You're all leaders in this space, and I appreciate your effort in not only participating in this meeting, but in moving this, this science forward and this path forward, and implementing these technologies and making it happen. And so thank you very much.